Tensions across South Africa surged to a boiling point after one of the most explosive announcements of President Cyril Ramaphosa's tenure, an address that instantly reshaped the national mood and ignited fierce debate. Speaking in a nationwide broadcast marked by an unusually hard tone, the president declared what he described as an all-out campaign against illegal immigration, framing the move as essential to restoring order and defending the sovereignty of the republic. His words, heavy with frustration and urgency, reverberated across the country within minutes, leaving no doubt that the government was signaling a dramatic shift in posture. Ramaphosa argued that South Africa could no longer sustain the pressure of undocumented migration, citing crime, economic strain, overwhelmed public services, and porous borders as dangers that had left the nation increasingly exposed. With cold, measured authority, he insisted that the initiative was rooted in law enforcement rather than hatred, punctuating his speech with a stark warning that the country must either reclaim control of its borders or risk losing control of its future altogether. Delivered from the steps of the historic Union buildings and flanked by senior ministers and top security officials, the address immediately triggered a storm of reactions. Citizens, political leaders, activists, and international observers weighed in almost instantly, transforming the speech into a national flashpoint. The president announced the establishment of a special national task force under the Department of Home Affairs, supported by the South African Police Service and the South African National Defence Force. Its mandate was blunt and uncompromising: identify, detain, and deport undocumented migrants with immediate effect. Ramaphosa stressed repeatedly that the crackdown targeted only those residing unlawfully in the country, arguing that weak enforcement, corruption at border posts, and years of systemic failure had turned South Africa into a magnet for undocumented migration. Law-abiding foreigners who contributed positively to society, he said, remained welcome, but those exploiting the system, running illicit businesses, committing crimes, or operating underground networks would no longer find sanctuary. Supporters of the president responded with loud approval, celebrating what they viewed as long overdue decisiveness from a government often criticized for hesitation and policy paralysis. In many economically strained communities, where unemployment remained stubbornly high and crime deeply entrenched, the announcement was greeted with relief. Residents argued that unchecked migration had overburdened hospitals and schools, intensified competition for scarce jobs, and strained already fragile social services. For these communities, the president's declaration was framed not as xenophobia but as a matter of survival. The sentiment reflected years of accumulated frustration among citizens who felt abandoned by political elites and overwhelmed by daily struggles for safety, employment, and dignity. At the same time, the speech sharply divided the nation. Opposition leaders, civil society groups, and international human rights organizations condemned the move almost immediately, accusing Ramaphosa of scapegoating vulnerable groups to distract from corruption scandals, slow economic growth, and internal weaknesses within the ruling African National Congress. Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen dismissed the address as political theater rather than a genuine solution, arguing that the president was shifting blame instead of confronting corruption, mismanagement, and a failing economy. In contrast, Action SA leader Herman Mashaba praised the approach, contending that South Africans had endured years of inaction and that decisive measures against illegal immigration were both justified and necessary to restore order and confidence. The consequences of the announcement were swift and dramatic. Within hours, reports emerged of coordinated raids across major cities including Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. Police officers, home affairs officials, and members of the military moved into transport hubs, informal settlements, construction sites, downtown shops, restaurants, and factories. Social media quickly filled with videos showing officers demanding documentation, detaining groups of people, and escorting individuals into police vans. Scenes of cheering bystanders alternated with tense confrontations, as residents attempted to intervene and migrants pleaded for their rights. In some areas, chaos erupted amid accusations of police brutality, racial profiling, and violations of due process, deepening the sense of unease and polarization. The operation, codenamed Operation Sovereign Shield, reportedly resulted in hundreds of arrests within the first 24 hours. The Ministry of Home Affairs confirmed that deportations would begin almost immediately, emphasizing that legal procedures would be followed. The presidency also signaled potential legislative reforms aimed at tightening visa regulations, strengthening border control, and imposing severe penalties on businesses found to be employing undocumented workers. Political analysts described the announcement as the most aggressive and politically risky move of Ramaphosa's career. With internal tensions simmering within the ANC, public trust declining, and elections approaching, many interpreted the campaign as an attempt to reposition the president as a defender of national security and an advocate for ordinary citizens frustrated by crime, unemployment, and corruption. By speaking directly to widespread public anger over failing infrastructure, joblessness, and persistent criminality, Ramaphosa appeared to be pursuing a form of political resurgence. Critics, however, warned that the strategy carried serious risks. Xenophobia, once inflamed, rarely subsides quietly, and analysts cautioned that while the approach might generate short-term domestic approval, it could severely damage South Africa's international standing. A scholar from the University of the Witwatersrand observed that targeting migrants for political gain might win local support but could undermine South Africa's long-held role as a champion of African unity and regional cooperation. Concerns quickly spread beyond South Africa's borders. Governments in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi issued statements urging restraint, dignity, and respect for human rights. Zimbabwe's government emphasized that many of its citizens in South Africa were fleeing severe economic hardship rather than engaging in criminal activity, warning that heavy-handed measures could strain long-standing diplomatic relationships. International organizations including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch condemned the raids, calling for transparency, humane treatment, and strict adherence to due process. They warned that refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless individuals risked being caught in a dangerous dragnet and urged authorities to conduct proper screening to avoid criminalizing desperation. Immigration lawyers reported a surge in anxious calls from families fearing separation or deportation despite having pending legal applications. On the streets, emotions ran high. In neighborhoods such as Hillbrow and Alexandra, long plagued by poverty, overcrowding, and strained infrastructure, many residents voiced support for the crackdown, citing the pressure undocumented migrants placed on housing, markets, and public safety. At the same time, community leaders and faith organizations warned that mass arrests could ignite violence, deepen divisions between locals and foreigners, and potentially spark mob attacks. One Johannesburg shop owner captured the dilemma succinctly, saying that people did not hate foreigners but felt their country was collapsing under unemployment and government failure, stressing that change was necessary but cautioning against destroying everything in the process. Experts debated whether the announcement marked the beginning of a lasting policy shift or merely a temporary political maneuver. Some argued that South Africa was entering an era of stricter border enforcement, strategic policing, and comprehensive immigration reform. Others feared a descent into deeper social division, government overreach, and violent confrontation. Within the ANC itself, opinions were sharply divided. Some party members praised the president's decisiveness, while others accused him of abandoning the movement's historic values in favor of populist rhetoric. Rumors of factional power struggles circulated, suggesting that the crackdown also served to strengthen Ramaphosa's position against internal rivals. International media framed South Africa as a nation at a dangerous crossroads. Analysts questioned whether the crackdown would address fundamental challenges such as unemployment, poverty, and crime, or merely provide temporary political cover. Economists warned that mass deportations could disrupt key sectors like agriculture, construction, and hospitality, which rely heavily on undocumented labor. Human rights advocates continued to raise alarms about overcrowded detention facilities, the risk of abuse, and the possibility of targeting individuals based on appearance or language rather than legal status. Despite the controversy, the president's message resonated deeply with many South Africans, particularly those in marginalized communities who felt ignored for years. Daily struggles with crime, housing shortages, and joblessness had fueled resentment and anger, and the promise of a government that finally listened and acted decisively offered a sense of hope. Whether that hope would translate into meaningful change or ignite further conflict remained uncertain. As dust settled over Johannesburg and Pretoria, conversations and debates filled taxi ranks, shopping centers, and crowded neighborhoods. Social media became a battleground of competing narratives, ranging from celebratory patriotism to fierce condemnation. South Africa now stood at the edge of a volatile chapter that could redefine its politics, identity, and role on the African continent. Neighboring nations prepared for potential diplomatic fallout, journalists and analysts worked to decode the president's long-term strategy, and human rights organizations readied legal challenges and monitoring efforts. Ordinary citizens, weary from economic hardship and political scandals, wondered whether the bold crackdown would bring relief or simply deepen divisions. For President Ramaphosa, the stakes could hardly be higher. His legacy, already shaped by party turmoil, corruption allegations, and slow economic recovery, now hung in the balance. How this campaign against illegal immigration unfolds may determine whether he is remembered as a decisive leader who restored order or as a president who allowed fear and political desperation to drive the nation toward a darker and more divided future.